Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at two clips taken from a recent episode of the 700 Club. In these clips, the hosts are going to be asked questions about, can a person lose their healing? And if so, what would a potential cause of that be? And the reason that I want to look at these clips is because I think it's a prime example of something that can pretty routinely take place within the Word of Faith movement, where as someone tries to explain something or answer a question, they end up making very contradictory statements that don't work together. And so I want us to see how this is what is taking place in these two clips, but I also want to offer a biblical answer to those sorts of questions about why do people suffer with illnesses and sickness and pains in their body, and how should we think about it. But before we get to our assessment, hello friends, my name is Matt. Welcome to my channel. If you could please take a second to subscribe, I greatly appreciate it, and it helps me to reach more people with Christian content on YouTube. All right, with that, let's go ahead and jump into our first clip.
And a viewer from YouTube sent us this question regarding this, and they said, what does it mean if the pain comes back after someone has been healed by God? Were we not thankful enough? Did God change his mind?
What do you think Bodo means by were we not thankful enough?
I think we can assume that it's because of us. Like because we're not in that same faith mindset when we maybe received the healing, and then it's gone away, like it's something we did. So is that true?
Well, I mean, do you think God's keeping a record of did you thank properly?
No, I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
When the 10 lepers were cleansed, how many came back and thanked him?
1.
What happened to the other 9? Did they go back into leprosy?
No.
No,
Yeah.
they stayed healed. So don't think that you're not thankful enough, that somehow God is, I'm really displeased with you. You
Nope,
should
not
have,
for
you
you.
know,
Yeah.
definitely be the one that comes back and says thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Because then you want the ongoing relationship.
All right, guys, so when we come to trying to answer the question of how come some people seem to experience short-term relief from a pain or from an illness and then it returns later, I do think it's appropriate to acknowledge that some of these healings might just be psychosomatic. This has been proven by science. If you're in the right environment, the right emotion and adrenaline stirred up within you, your brain can do a lot and make you feel better, even though you're not being healed in some sort of supernatural way. So I do think it's appropriate that we at least acknowledge that that takes place regularly. However, having said that, I do believe that God can and still does heal today. So what would we say about a situation where God legitimately does supernaturally heal someone? It's not psychosomatic whatsoever, but at a later date, that particular illness or those symptoms reproduce themselves, right? They show up again. How should we think about that? Well, when presented with this question, Gordon, who is the male host on that program, said that we most definitively should not think it is because we have sinned or done something wrong. It's not because we didn't thank God enough or because we were doing something wrong. And I do want to look at one passage of scripture that would seem to support this, right? This is John chapter 9, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 3. It says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. So when Jesus is asked about this particular person who was born blind, who sinned? Was it him? Was it his parents? Jesus says, yeah, it wasn't either of them. It's this illness, this condition, this blindness was not brought about because of any particular sort of sin. So that would seem to back up Gordon's teaching, right? That it's not because of sin. It's not because you were not being thankful enough, right? So he's pretty strong and very clear in saying it's not because of sin. It's not because you've done anything wrong. But right after he said that, he is going to continue on with this sort of teaching, and I think you'll be able to pick up the pretty big contradiction that we're about to hear.
But that does happen. I mean, people can walk in healing and then it comes back. So
Why?
I don't know. I mean, I genuinely am not sure. I don't know if it I mean, we just said, no, it's not because you're not thanking God enough, so then he's going to take it away from you. I honestly don't know.
Okay, when Jesus cast out a demon, what did he warn somebody about?
Inviting it back in?
Right. Be careful, lest you sin, and a worse thing happen to you.
Wow. Yeah.
I've heard from people that were in drug and alcohol addiction and in recovery that if they slipped, they didn't realize that the addiction had been growing all along.
Oh, wow.
And it was worse than when it was worse.
Yeah.
Their second bottom was worse. You know, be careful that a worse thing doesn't come upon you. I'm not trying to instill fear in people, but I am trying to instill a righteousness that when you choose God, go the righteous path and stay on it. Because if you deviate, you can go back into habits and behaviors, and you'll find that it's even worse for you.
Okay, I'm assuming you caught it, but right after Gordon said that the reason that you would lose your healing is not because you have sinned, he goes on to talk about how sin opens up the door for you to lose your healing. And in order to talk about this, he uses a passage from John chapter 5. He says that it was Jesus casting a demon out of someone and the demon returning. Later, he was slightly mistaken on that. It actually just had to do with healing. This is actually referring to the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. And so we're going to look at a couple of verses from this passage of scripture. So we're going to be in John chapter 5. Let's start with verses 5 through 9. It says, "One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be healed?' The sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool of when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me.' Jesus said to him, 'Get up, take your bed, and walk.' And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked." So we see this man received healing from Jesus. Now let's go to verse 14, and this was the verse that he referenced there. Okay. It says, "Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, 'See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you.'" So now Jesus seems to be indicating that, hey, if you sin, you could have something worse than this illness or this, he was an invalid. He couldn't move. He couldn't use his limbs correctly. He said something worse might happen to you. But let's get back before I offer a balanced approach to this and answer this question and hopefully clarify things for you. Let's get back to the obvious contradiction. Do you see how this sort of teaching really confuses people? On one hand, you're saying, hey, listen, it's not because you have sin in your life. It's not because you've done anything wrong. But then you turn around just a couple of seconds later and you're like, well, listen, if you start doing these sorts of things, it's going to open up the door for you to lose your healing. I think there has been a gradual transition within the Word of Faith movement to this sort of teaching. Some of the old school guys like Kenneth Copeland still absolutely teach 100% that if you don't receive your healing, it is your fault. I have a couple of clips. In fact, I'll play the clip for you right now so that you can see what I'm talking about, where he says that if you don't get your healing, it is your fault.
Well, I don't understand why God healed them and he won't heal me. Could it be by some stretch of the imagination? Oh, probably not, but could it be that is your fault, not God's? Oh, yeah.
All right, so that's the old school guard. I think many people recognize that that doesn't go over too well, and that's not really biblical. So it seems like in today's Word of Faith movement, a lot of people are trying to play both sides. It's like, well, it could be because of your sin, but listen, it's not because of your sin. But also, if you're sinning, you might open up the door for it to happen. And people get really confused. And this has been my experience talking to people who have been in more hyper-charismatic Word of Faith type circles. Oftentimes, they are very confused. They are trying to figure out why they have not been healed, why God has not moved in the way that they thought he should move. move. And I'm not actually really focusing in this video about the overall doctrine and theology of the Word of Faith movement. I do think it is aberrant and in error to tell people that it is always God's will for them to be healed in the here and now. I just don't think that's consistent with Scripture. What I do want to do is help people who have been confused and you're constantly on this search and you feel frustrated and you feel worn out of, what is causing this? Why am I not getting my physical healing? Well, how do I think that we should look at this biblically? Well, we looked at two passages of Scripture, one from John 9, one from John 5. And I think that what we see if we take the totality of Scripture and put it together, remember, we don't just isolate one passage of Scripture and get our doctrine and theology just from one passage. We have to look what the entire Bible has to say about a particular topic. So when it comes to illness, sickness in our life, pains in our body, why do they come about? Well, I think that you can say that an overwhelming majority of the problems that we face in that regard in the world are not caused by any particular sin that we would single out in a person. So it's not because I did one particular thing that this is being caused. Rather, I think you could say it is just a product of the fall in general, the fact that we have sin in the world. This is one of the results of that. However, we do see examples, including like the one that we looked at, where it seems to indicate that there can be times where it might be given to someone because of sin in their life. So it seems like either or could be true, although I would tend to say that most of the time it is probably not because of a particular sin. So then, how are we supposed to go about trying to figure out maybe why we have physical problems in our life? How should we try to figure out what is the cause of my illness? Well, friends, I would like to point you to Psalm 131, verse 1. It says, "O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me." Friends, the ultimate reality of the matter is that God's ways are way higher than our ways. His thoughts are above our thoughts. We don't understand all that he is doing. We don't understand why he is doing those things. And I don't think it's a fruitful endeavor to try to figure out why everything is happening in your life. What I can say is that as Christians, at all times, we should definitively have a great desire to want to live a holy life that pleases the Lord. But the desire to live that holy life should not primarily be so that I can receive some sort of physical healing or financial blessing. It should rather be out of gratitude for what God has graciously done in sending his Son to die on my behalf for the forgiveness of sin. So I want to honor God with my obedience and with a holy life because I love him and I am grateful for what he has done. I think if we always have that attitude and mindset saying, God, I don't want sin in my life, no matter what happens. Lord, even if I have an affliction or an ailment that is not brought about because of any particular sin in my life, I still want to honor you. I still want to please you. I still want to obey you. So I think that you could just speak generally and say at all times you want to see if there is sin in your life and you want to try to turn away from that sin, whether or not you get your healing or you do not. Friends, God is sovereign over all things. It is not up to us to try to figure out why everything is happening. We simply trust in him and we have a desire to want to live that sort of godly life. Listen, if you are suffering or dealing with some sort of illness or ailment right now, I want you to know that I don't intend to come across cold and make it seem like, well, it doesn't matter that you're suffering or you're going through difficulties. No, we can have sympathy and have compassion for those people. And in fact, I would say it's good to ask God for healing, to trust that he is able to do that sort of thing. What I am saying is that we should not make that the primary goal of our life to receive physical healing. We should be so grateful that we have received spiritual healing, and we trust that God is going to work all things together for good. Whatever his reason is, if you are a believer, he is going to work everything together for good, and we should keep our eyes focused on eternity. If you are having to deal with some temporary setbacks and problems in the here and now, it doesn't mean that they're insignificant or they don't matter, but it does mean that they don't compare to the glory that is yet to be revealed. Some of the most godly people in the world are people who struggle with physical illnesses, with pains in their body, but they continue to trust God. They trust that one day they will have glorified bodies that won't have any of that stuff anymore. So ultimately, I would just say it's probably not the best use of your time to try to figure out what is the specific cause of your ailment. Rather, trust God, seek after holiness, pray for your healing, trust Him, but make it up in your mind that you're going to serve Him, seek after Him regardless, and that you're not going to get bogged down with having to know the intricacies and the details of why everything is happening. I just think that leads a lot of people into confusion and leads to a lot of disappointment. Let's trust in Him. He is sovereign over all things, and He is indeed good. All right, friends, that's all I have for you today. I hope this is helpful to you. If it has been helpful, would you please consider subscribing to this channel so that we can help get this content out to more people? It certainly is greatly needed on YouTube. A lot of people are sitting under some pretty bad teaching, stuff that's a lot worse than the stuff that we were analyzing today. I wanted to go over it because I think there are a lot of people who have been influenced by this and they're very confused, and I wanted to try to help them out. But if you subscribe to the channel, we can get this content out to more people. So thank you in advance. All right, guys, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, God bless.